Good morning, everyone here present at the World Room, and everyone following us online. I first want to thank Sheila Coronel for her support organizing this event as an open event. Thank you, Sheila. Thanks, Hande, Amy. Thank you, all the staff here at the J School, and especially thanks to my students, Norayana, Justin, Lucianette, and John Paul for helping with the organization of this event. Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to introduce you to Marina Walker Guevara, ICIJ's Deputy Director and the brain behind the Panama Papers project that has sent shock waves around the world since its publication 23 days ago. Marina is a native from Argentina. She has reported from half a dozen countries, and her investigations have won more than 20 national and international awards, including the Investigative Reporters and Editors, Overseas Press Club, the Polk Awards, the Society of Professional Journalists, and the European Commission. I have had the pleasure to work very close with Marina and with all the ICIJ staff in the Offshore Leaks project, and more recently in the Panama Papers investigation. Having witnessed firsthand all the possible obstacles that such an ambitious enterprise can incubate, I prefer to introduce you to Marina as one of the new world leaders who is dramatically changing the world for good while keeping a low profile. Under Marina's leadership, ICIJ has reshaped the way we investigative journalists work across the world. The Panama Papers is much more than the biggest leak in history. It is the best living proof that we can overcome the big egos in our industry to create a radical collaboration and a real community. So let's welcome Marina Walker, and let's hear firsthand from her how ICIJ has achieved all this. Welcome, Marina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Giannina. Thank you, Sheila, and everybody else. It is a real honor to be here. It's great to leave the newsroom and come to New York and pretend that nothing else is happening, although it is happening. And I feel at home here. I did have some nightmares last night that technology was not going to work, but I see that now I am in good hands. Everything is going to be okay. I thought that we would start, one of the first questions I'm sure your editors ask you when you pitch a story is like why we should care. And in every time we start a project, we need to ask ourselves why we should care about this topic and why, especially why you're going to invest an entire year of your life on something. So we asked ourselves that question, and we also tried to answer that question for our audience when we published, and we did it in the form of a video. It's a very short video, and I wanted us to watch together, and then I will go ahead with my presentation.
Over the past 3 years, Syria's Air Force has rained death on more than 21,000 civilians. Their bodies ripped apart by exploding barrel bombs, missiles dropped on homes, businesses, bus stops, even hospitals. These war crimes have been well documented. Not so the part played by the shadowy world of offshore finance. Behind the scenes, companies using offshore tax havens were accused of supplying fuel to the Syrian Air Force. In 2014, multiple governments, including the UK and US, issued bans on doing business with these companies. But now, a new global investigation has revealed that a Panamanian firm helped these companies operate as attacks in Syria continued. That firm, Mossack Fonseca, is a key player in a sprawling, secretive industry that the world's rich and powerful use to hide assets and skirt rules by setting up front companies in far-flung jurisdictions. More than 300 journalists trawled through millions of leaked records from Mossack Fonseca to expose an alarming list of clients involved in bribery, arms deals, tax evasion, financial fraud, and drug trafficking. Behind the invoices, emails, and paper trails are real victims. In Russia, businessmen kidnapped orphan girls as young as 13, raped them, then sold them to others for sex.
After this rape, I was aching all over. I started very much fearing men. I felt as though they wanted only one thing, only sex with me. When I was taken into a foster home, I felt as though my foster father would rape me if I'm left alone with him.
One of the alleged ringleaders was a client of Mossack Fonseca's. When the firm discovered their client was a pedophile, they decided they were not legally obliged to report his offshore business activities to authorities. In Uganda, a company that wanted to sell a prospective oil field paid Mossack Fonseca to help it avoid $400 million in taxes. It was simple paperwork. The company's address was changed from one tax haven to another. In a country where 1 in 3 people live on less than $1.25 a day, $400 million represents more than the government's annual health budget. Uganda spent years in court trying to force the company to pay its taxes. Meanwhile, hospitals in the shadow of the oil field lacked funds for even the most basic equipment. Patients slept on floors. They were asked to bring their own medical supplies, like sterile gloves and cotton balls.
It was a surprise to me because I expected all this equipment to be at the health center. When all these things are not there, nurses say we cannot work on you. At times, we are forced to leave and return home unattended to. Some women have lost their lives and babies.
Uganda ranks among the worst 10 countries in the world for high maternal, newborn and child mortality rates due to a lack of access to good healthcare. The offshore industry has recently come under fire for enabling dubious activities like these. But firms like Mossack Fonseca have helped clients continue to operate behind a veil of secrecy. Until this shadowy world is held accountable, international criminals will keep doing business, tax dollars will be dodged, and bombs will continue to fall.
Okay. Let's go to the presentation. Sorry, I'm just to this computer. So next time somebody tells you what's the big deal with the offshore world, everything is legal, you can remember some of these cases. The problem is that it is a secret world and it allows the rich and powerful to play by a different set of rules. And by allowing them to play by a different set of rules, it deepens inequality and injustice throughout the world. And that's why we should care, and that's why it's worth spending a year on this topic. So let's get started here. We're going to try to make it, please, there's going to be Q&A at the end. As I say, that's the best part, because you get to ask the questions, but please feel free to interrupt as much as you want. I would love that. And let's have a real conversation. I love this picture because this is what we think when we think about investigative journalists. We all have been that. It's okay. We will continue in some ways to be that. It's the scoop, it's your little corner, it's being away and nobody knows what you are doing for a long time and you are doing it all on your own, and then you publish and you are the star of the world and you did it all on your own. And that has been the traditional model of investigative journalism. And like Giannina said, what ICIJ was created to do was to break with that paradigm. The problem with the lone wolves is that they are trying to solve problems like that. That's the kind of investigation we're doing these days. And that's just like a small, maybe 2% of the Mossack Fonseca network of offshore companies. And it looks like that. So the lone wolf is going to have a really hard time trying to crack everything on his or her own. ICIJ was created in 1997, and as Mark Cabra, our data editor, always says, it's not a network, Marina. Don't say anymore it's a network, it's a community. And that apparently is really the case. It's a community that has been built on trust over the years, trial and error. It hasn't always been perfect. It hasn't always been easy. But today we are nearly 200 journalists who know one another, have worked before together, and know that when there's an urgent story of world importance, we can call on each other and we'll all jump and do this crazy thing we did last year. Yes, and that's the trust that I was talking before, and that's basically the basis of everything, because the concept of ICIJ is what we call radical sharing. You come on this investigation and you don't keep things to yourself. You are there to help build knowledge. It's kind of like a crowdsourcing by highly specialized individuals, in this case investigative journalists, and we need everyone's input to build this global story, to make sense, in this case, for example, of 11 million records. And if I find the Prime Minister of Iceland in the data, I immediately have to share it with the team, because the investigation has gone from here to here today. I am very proud of our data unit, and I included this slide because 2 members of our secret weapon, the data unit, are Stabile graduates, alumni, Cecile Chiles Gallego, and the editor, Mark Cabra. We also have another member of the ICIJ staff, Sasha Chapkin, who came from Colombia, also from the Stabile program. So please keep sending people to ICIJ. The data unit today is 50% of the ICIJ staff. We're a very small staff. We like to see ourselves as a startup. We want to have that mentality. Fail fast, pick yourself up, try again, be bold, take risks, and invest a lot in technology. Because also we see ourselves as a service organization at this point. We are a reporting organization primarily, but we also realize that we are serving now a community of media organizations and journalists, and we can't ask them to collaborate and then tell them use email. If we're going to ask them to do radical sharing, we better have the right technology so they can achieve that. And that's why we have developed this data unit that we are proud of. And this data unit serves a very, very diverse community all over the world, from China to Chile. Some people don't have iPhones, for example, or internet much of the day, and they still need to get access to 11 million documents, no matter where they are, and it needs to be good, and we need to be there for them to help them achieve that. And they need to do PGP, and if they can figure it out by themselves, fine, but otherwise we see it as our responsibility to help them achieve that as well. So before the Panama Papers, for the past 3-4 years, we've been doing other investigations that in some ways have led to this kind of epic big one that was called the Panama Papers. We started in 2012 with Secrecy for Sales, which was the first time that we were able to look into the secret world of offshore finance. We did the China side of that investigation. It was called China Leaks, and it exposed for the first time how the relatives of the leaders of China were all the communist relatives of the leaders of China were using the worst of the capitalist system, the offshore world. Then we moved and we did LuxLeaks, and Leslie's here, she worked on that, and it showed how some of the world's biggest multinationals were paying basically zero tax or 1% tax in a place like Luxembourg, and robbing money from governments around the world. And then last year we did SwissLeaks, which was looking at one specific bank, HSBC in this case, and seeing how that one bank had basically colluded with criminals all over the world to help them do business. So that's what we were doing. And when we finished SwissLeaks, my boss and I looked at each other and we said, okay, we're done with offshore, and we are done with the big collaborations. Let's take a break. Let's do something small, public records, time to rest. And like 2 weeks later, we got a call from our friends at Süddeutsche Zeitung, the German newspaper, and they said that it looks like we're going to have to do this again. And we looked at ourselves and said, well, perhaps one more time. So let's talk a little bit about the Panama Papers and how it all worked out, what was the behind the scenes. So these are Bastian Obermeier and Frederick Obermeier, the Obermeiers, as we call them. And they work at Süddeutsche. They are very young. They are the new generation of investigative journalists in Germany. And they had been working with us in all the previous offshore investigations that I mentioned before. And more than a year ago, they were contacted by an anonymous source who told them this: are you interested in data? And of course, they right away said, sure. So the conversation continued. The source had some conditions, said that his life or her life was in danger, that there was never going to be a meeting, and there was never going, it had to remain, he or she had to remain completely anonymous. So it was a new and different situation for, of course, we all feel more comfortable if we can meet a source and have coffee with a source, right? But it doesn't always happen that way, and we have to be ready to deal with situations like this. So, of course, you ask, what is your motivation? That's from day one. You want to know what is this person thinking? Why is this person doing this? And this is what the person said: I want to make these crimes public. And then they asked them, how much data are we talking about? More than anything you have ever seen. And that's when they called ICIJ, because, in part because of that trust. They knew that if it was something huge, it was likely going to be more than just one newspaper can handle. So they called on the pack of wolves, and the source was right. This is the comparison with the previous leaks that I mentioned before. And we also included WikiLeaks, the Cablegate. Look at the size, and the one on the right in red is Panama Papers, 2.6 terabytes of data. This is how it compares to the rest of the work we had done before. So it was a huge, huge, huge challenge. First of all, the first thing we had to do is how in the world are we going to deal with this from a technology point of view? How do we grab this data? How do we process the data? How do we index the data? Because of course, the first thing we thought is we need to make it available to journalists. So we're not going to hide it in some secure room in Washington and expect everyone to travel to us. That's not going to happen, because then you're going to leave out all the journalists who can't travel and don't have budgets. So thank God we have the data unit. And so they calculated, at the beginning there were only 3 million files, and they calculated that if we devote about 10 seconds per file to do all of those actions that I had described before, they would take a year. And of course, to do all those actions, including OCR, in which is making the files readable, or like half of the files were not even readable. If you put them, so even if you put them in a platform to be searched, you can't search them. So it was going to take us 1 year just to process 3 million records. We didn't know at that time that it was going to be 11 million records in the end. So we created an army of servers in Amazon, 35 of them, and that decreased the amount of time to 11 days. So from taking 1 year to complete the process for the 3 million records, it went down to 11 days. At the same time, we had to think, of course, is the microphone working? Okay. We had to think, of course, about the people, right? So how do we, trying to understand at that early stage, what were the countries where we definitely needed to have people, bringing them on, training them on the project and how we're going to deal with it, and then, of course, then coordinate, that dance where everyone is going to be doing his or her own work, and at the same time, we're all going to be working together. So the way that ICIJ work is we decentralized a lot. We don't want to control what the newspapers and the television stations do. They have their own editorial process. ICIJ cannot interfere in that. But the journalists were called together during the research and the reporting. And so that's that careful dance that we have to coordinate. So as I said before, we can't expect journalists to communicate by email about these things. So at ICIJ, we have created our own virtual newsroom. We call it the Facebook of investigative journalism because it looks like a Facebook wall. You have your wall, you have your avatar. We create groups. Everyone, you can see when you log in who is logged in, who is active at the time. And the expectation is that people every time in the morning when you check your own Facebook and Twitter, you would open the Global Eye Hub And you would check who's there and what's new there. Who has shared findings, who has a question, who has uploaded a new document that you might be interested in. So we try to make it sure that the journalists incorporate it as just one more tool or social platform that they use in their daily life. They create their own groups. For example, there was a group for politically exposed people, like all the politicians that we were finding in the data. There was a Latin American group, and it was in Spanish sometimes, so sometimes they feel more comfortable doing that. There was just a geeky, so we don't all want to learn about the geeky stuff that the geekies are talking, right? So they create their own group, and they do their geeky talk, and anybody who wants to join, joins. So it's very tailored. And people often ask me, how did you manage to keep this secret for so long with so many people? And in part it's because of the trust, but in part it's also because we provided this space where they can talk. So in some ways this was a little bit of like the therapy room where they could go, okay, they couldn't talk to anybody else. Sometimes they couldn't even talk to their bosses. There was a journalist in Venezuela who works for a newspaper that is very aligned with the government. She didn't tell her bosses for the longest time that she was working on these investigations because she said, and why did we work with her? Because she's great. And because she's the real deal and she's a digger. And so I don't care she works for a government newspaper. It's not a government newspaper, it's a government leaning. So she was able to keep that secret even from her bosses. But she would go to this platform and she would find a community that would support her, that would share knowledge with her, and will help her with her reporting. I remember, for example, one day our Iceland reporter, and you know that the Prime Minister of Iceland resigned after the investigation, was this one lonely guy in the dead of winter in Iceland. And he quit his job because he said, we are 300,000 people in Iceland, Marina. If I keep my job and I have to disclose that I'm doing this, tomorrow the Prime Minister knows, no matter what. It's like we're all related, we're a family. So he quit his job and he basically spent the winter in his home with his wife, working from home. He put paper on the windows, so because he was paranoid that people are going to look inside and are going to be suspicious. And then all his friends were saying, like, are you lazy, crazy? What is it? Why are you not working? What are you doing? For months and months and months. And I remember one day when he came and just said everything in the forum and said, I thank you so much for being there and for, you are the only people basically I can talk to. And now he can say that, his reporting led to a very important resignation in his country. People can also share documents in the iHub. We have, this is for the more geeky of use, when we have a two-step authentication, so you not only have your password to access this site, but you also use an app in Google that gives you a unique code. So if somebody hacks you, they need your computer and your password, but they also would need your phone in order to access the global iHub. So it's 600 users, and why do I tell you, why is it important that people posted 1,500 forum topics or that they share their statuses 21,000 occasions? Because this is where we can see that the paradigm has changed. That there were 21,000 occasions in which the lone wolves felt that instead of sitting on the great information that they just had discovered, they were putting in, offering forward it to the community, and they were sharing with everyone. You could do all the tools in the world, and then they go unused if you don't have the right story and if you don't have the right motivation and the sense of community and trust. We also meet face-to-face because, believe me, it's not just technology that is going to make all these things happen. So in this case, we had 3 meetings in Washington, in Munich. We also had a meeting in, like 5 meetings? Washington, Munich. We did a meeting in Africa just for the African journalists because they weren't able to pay their way to the other meetings. And we had a meeting about Russia in London. So everyone working on the Russia story was able to meet. In those meetings, we have trainings. There are tracks in Spanish, tracks in English. Everybody paid their own way. Again, it's very decentralized, but that's the place where we meet face-to-face and we plan the investigation ahead. And we do small groups, we plan stories, anything that you can imagine. These meetings are incredibly important, again, to build that community. And then, of course, where do we put the documents? So we also have a big platform. I don't know if it's a big platform, but we have a good platform. It's open software, and that's where we uploaded the 11.5 million documents where journalists basically can search, like in Google. You can search your mom's name. You can search the address where you were born. You can search the name of the president's wife. You can do Boolean searches. You can do all kinds of, you can filter by year. You can filter by country. So this is the platform that throughout the project we were updating. So up until like a month before publication, we were still uploading documents for journalists to go through. I'm going to show you just like some examples of like, so what were these secret documents? What do they look like? Some of them, for example, the power of attorneys. They were very important documents because the whole point of the offshore world, of course, as you know, is that we are hiding who the real beneficial owner of a company is. That's the whole point. And sometimes even the people who are incorporating these companies, they don't even know who those beneficial owners are. And sometimes they do. And many times those beneficial owners are revealed in documents like this, as we learned, where somebody is giving, or somebody important close to the beneficial owner is giving control of a company. In this case, it was the personal secretary of the King of Morocco, and he was given a power of attorney to basically buy a luxury yacht for the king. And we found him, and of course, then we said, okay, let's check out who is this guy who's buying a yacht, and sure enough, was the secretary of the king. So the power of attorneys were always important documents that would get us closer to the real owner of a company or an asset. It was also very important. This data has a lot of passports and IDs and identifying information, and that is crucial also in this search for who are the people behind the companies, and also to make sure we're not making a mistake. My boss always tells us it will take just one person that we misidentified because has the same name and even was born in the same city, and the whole thing just collapses. Because we cannot make a mistake. We cannot misidentify, say we got this guy and it's not that person. So those passports are really, really important. In this case, this is Rami Makhlouf. He is the cousin of President Assad in Syria. He was blacklisted by the US for his connections to the president. And he was a client of this firm of Mossack Fonseca and of HSBC, even after he had been blacklisted by the US. This is a contract. This is the biggest contractor in Mexico. He's very close to the president of Mexico. Some of you may remember the case of the White House, it was called La Casa Blanca, and how this contractor had built a home for the wife of the president. Right after that scandal happened, this person opened a series, very complicated web of trusts and companies, and moved, as you can see there, $100 million that he had in bank accounts. So he was protecting, in light of the investigations against him into his assets, he was moving his assets out of the country. So, and the reason I picked this one is because this is an email. About a third, I think it is, or no, I'm not going to give a date, a figure, because then Mari's going to tell me that I got it wrong. So a lot of the documents are emails, are communications between the offshore providers and the clients. And they are incredibly revelatory and helpful, and they drive you crazy because you have to follow the chain, sometimes for years, of like a single communication with a client until you can figure it out, whatever happened. But they are very, very helpful. You have also more traditional things like a share certificate that also helps you. In this case, it's an Italian, he's a fugitive, searched by Interpol, sought by Interpol at this time. It was really helpful to find that he was a shareholder of this offshore company, because this offshore company was buying and selling apartments in New York, opposite Carnegie Hall, as he was a fugitive, and as the Department of Justice had a freeze order, he was still able to use his offshore companies to buy and sell apartments right here in New York. He's still a fugitive. So those are kind of like the nice, the data helps solve a lot of mysteries, and that is something really good about it. We also have a network analysis tool. We use Linkurious. Again, we paid for the system. They gave us for free, but it's a paid system, but it allows you to look at, you're looking at the documents, but that's not enough. You need to sometimes be able to visualize, okay, who else is in this company? What else is associated to this individual? In this case, it's Wintris. Wintris is the company of the Prime Minister of Iceland, the one that and you can see there how both him and his wife were shareholders of this company. And this is something that he denied at the beginning. And he was like, no, it's only my wife's company. But we had the proof in the documents, and we were able to visualize it in Linkurious, that both of them were linked to this company, 50% of shares each. And that's what in the end ended up costing him his position. So Linkurious was an incredibly helpful tool. And this is what, I'm going to tell you something afterwards more about that. Of course, during the reporting process, like in any other investigation, this is not just about looking in this database and just obsessing over what is inside there. We are going outside of the database all the time to verify, to do reporting in corporate registries, places from Panama to Cyprus, court records, other databases. We use one that is particularly helpful that is called Arachnis that I suggest that you check out, that has a lot of, for example, court records from places like China. We do interviews. We do all the traditional reporting that we all do. So when people think sometimes, oh, leaks are easy, you just get everything on your lap, but that's not true. Leaks are incredibly hard, not only because all the challenges of dealing with the big data, but also because then everything has to be, of course, verified. It's detective work. You are piecing and pulling and connecting the dots in very, very complicated ways. And then, of course, we seek comment. And Sheila asked me to show you some of the questions that we send, in this case, Mossack Fonseca, the company whose documents we had. We sent comment to every single person we were naming in the stories. We sent them long questionnaires. For example, we sent, I think it was 220 questions to Rossiya Bank in Russia, a bank that is very close to President Putin and his entourage. We sent 50 questions to Mossack Fonseca. In those questions, we lay out everything we know, basically. We don't like to surprise people. We want them to know what we have, and we want them to be able to comment. And their comment, when they comment, makes the story better. So never feel concerned that you're going to give it away. Sometimes you take a risk. What happened in Russia? President Putin called a press conference after receiving his questions and denounced ICIJ as a CIA operation. The Prime Minister of Iceland did the same. They started posting on Facebook. But that's okay. You still obviously do it. So seeking comment from Mossack Fonseca about people that had been listed by OFAC, by the Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control, and why they had kept them as clients. Mossack Fonseca for the longest time had said that they don't handle clients' money, that they are just kind of like this neutral witness. They don't do anything. We don't touch their money. We don't know who they are. We don't know if they're good or bad. And we found that they were actually handling $1.2 billion, including of people who were convicted criminals. So we asked them why that happened. And of course, we had to count the money. It wasn't like in one email we find, we handled 1.2 billion. No, we counted the 600 transactions, we pulled them, and we did the data analysis to arrive to that. Backdating documents was another great strategy they had, where a client was in trouble with the law, they would just backdate documents to deceive law enforcement. So we gave them the examples, specific examples of clients when they had done that, and we asked them to comment about that. We saw a lot of bribery happening. And again, they say, well, if the clients, decide to use their companies for bribery, that's their problem. Well, it's not their problem. So what do you do to ensure that your clients are not using these vehicles, basically, for some of the biggest bribery scandals in the world, like FIFA, or in this case, Siemens? And then April 3rd came, and it was finally publication date. It took a long time to agree on that date. We tried to make it a community decision. It's never going to please everyone, but in the end, that we needed a long time. Some partners wanted to publish in December, some partners wanted to publish as early as, like, I think last September. And it was important to be able to convey how we needed the time to do a really good job. These are some of the front pages in the Netherlands, Miami Herald, of course, the Deutsche in Germany, and The Guardian. And ICIJ, of course, this were some of our stories. The Russia story was one of the key ones, because again, in that case, we were able to count the money, which is really important. We were able to see, that what the Treasury Department has been saying for a long time, but we have never seen the actual proof that the circle of close friends and relatives of Putin are shuffling money, getting money from public companies and getting them into their pockets. We saw how it happened. We saw how they shuffled the money, and we counted the money, and it was almost $2 billion. And it all goes through, the Rosia Bank and other banks close to the government, but they also go around the world. The money, the loans travel all over the world. They even come through the US. So that was an important story. Oh, by the way, Putin says that the reporting and the $2 billion is all accurate. He also said, which is great, I find it amazing that he would say that. He also says that the money is used, in this case by his best friend, Sergei Rodulgin, his childhood friend, is mostly used to buy musical instruments because he's a cellist. So that was the explanation. And of course, a very important story about how we counted again 33 companies and individuals that were blacklisted for financing terrorism, drug trafficking, and other crimes, and they were clients and were kept as clients of Mossack Fonseca. We look at the big banks and their role in the offshore world. They are the gatekeepers, or they are supposed to be the gatekeepers. And in this case, they were instead the facilitators of a lot of tax evasion and other, if not illegal, often really immoral activities. We created an application with 75, I think, politicians from around the world. Why did we focus on the politicians? Because if we're talking about a system, we're talking about a system that is broken, a system that creates injustice and inequality. Well, what happens when those that are tasked with fixing that system are all part of that system? So that's why we did a special, they had their special place not only in the stories, but also here where people can search by country, they can look at the profile, and they can see all the companies. In this case, who is he? Which king is it? I think it's the king of...
the Emirates.
Okay, the Sheikh of the Emirates. We also provided the figures. We did charts. Where were the places, the top where most of the companies were incorporated, and we did a game as well, so people can play and they can take options at each stage. You can be, for example, I think in one case you can be a soccer player, and then you have different options if you want to hide your money. That was fairly popular. And of course, the impact has been really big, and we didn't anticipate that. It was pretty exciting to see. This is an image of the protests in Iceland that led to the resignation of the prime minister. But there were protests in several other countries as well, including Malta and the UK. The FIFA, was a big part of the investigation. High-level resignations. We found it was a beautiful story. One of the members of the ethics committee in FIFA was helping create offshore companies for the FIFA officials that were indicted for bribery. So that was pretty good. And just last week, it also led to the arrest of drug cartel members that were living in a beautiful town of Punta del Este in Uruguay. And they were at large. And because the journalist wrote, and the company has this address, law enforcement were able to act and capture those drug dealers. In the US, there's a criminal investigation opened. As you know, the prosecutors have requested ICIJ to collaborate with them, and we have said that we are not an arm of law enforcement and that we welcome their interest and their investigation, but that we are not going to collaborate with that or with any other investigation around the world. President Obama talked about the Panama Papers, and he said something that is very important, that is, a lot of it is legal, but that's exactly the problem, that we have created a system that allows this secret world to exist. So let's compare and I'm about to finish now. Let's compare these two paradigms that we have discussed. So we have the lone wolf paradise, scooping, all individual achievement, star treatment. It's very proprietary. You get a lot of national impact most of the times, and it's very vertical. Let's compare it with the network model. So the scooping turns in collaborating. The individual achievement is a shared ownership. The star treatment, it doesn't exist. So if you expect that, then don't do the collaboration. It's not proprietary, it's open source. The national impact turns into global impact, and that's what we've seen. And it's not a vertical thing, it's a peer-to-peer dynamic. But of course, with direction and with guidance, somebody has to call the shots, and we do. That's what ICIJ is tasked to do. Something we agreed and that we learned very early on is that when you put together these teams, and you can apply it to your own, even when here in school you have to create a little team to do an investigation or even a paper together. Find the right people that you can work with. It's like inviting people to dinner in your house. You're going to be very careful who you're going to pick. You pick people that can relate to each other, that are going to have a nice conversation, that you're going to try to pick people that are not going to hate each other, right? And so it's very important to give that same kind of thought to putting together your team when you do an investigation. We think a lot about these qualities when we pick who we're going to work on. So it's not just who's the best journalist, who's the star in a country or another, but who has this kind of attributes that is going to make it work. Because it takes just one person with the wrong personality. Dare I say that? And the whole thing can break apart, right? And everybody can be miserable. So some of the things that we learned, rules, not a lot, a few, but very clear and very well communicated from the beginning. For example, you are not allowed to share the data with other people. You are not allowed to talk about the investigation while we are investigating. And we all credit one another. Things like that. We talk about the meetings, we talk about the digital tools that are so important, and we are happy to share knowledge about those if you want to have those tools and use them in your own work. Manage the conflict. Conflict is going to exist in any human collaboration. You can minimize it, you can isolate it, and if you pick the right people, it can almost be like conflict-free. And I'm happy to say that that was the case with Panama Papers, and that made a big difference. And then decentralize. Don't try to control what your media partners and the reporters are doing beyond the agreed rules. Let them do their stories. Nobody wants to be told how to write or who they need to write about in their own country. So when people say, how do you give them their freedom, don't interfere, just agree on the basic and the most important things. And then what comes next? What comes next is May 9th. We are going to release a database with 300,000 offshore companies. The basic information, basically the company, who owns it, the shareholders, the directors, the addresses from more than 200 countries around the world. 200,000 of those 300,000 are Panama Papers companies. So basically the ones we have been investigating. The other 100,000 are the previous project offshore leaks, and those were already public. So we are combining everything in one platform so people can go to one place, search, and find in both databases the information. That's coming up May 9th. We are also going to integrate all the documents, what we are not making public, and that we have from Swiss leaks, offshore leaks, all these investigations, flags leaks. We're going to integrate them all in something called the Knowledge Center. We're calling it the Knowledge Center. So again, you can search in one place and find the information, and we're going to continue doing partnerships with people and with journalists and media organizations that want to access the ICIJ Media Knowledge Center for their investigations. And then I'm going to finish with something that David Lee, the legendary editor of The Guardian, said when ICIJ did its first investigation that was about tobacco smuggling and how big tobacco had colluded with organized crime. And he was part of it. And he said something that applies to what has happened now. Something less tangible, but perhaps even more romantic, has been nourished as well. A worldwide optimism about new possibilities for chasing the truth. Thank you very much. And we can
Thank you.
Oh, we're going to see that.
Thank you very much, Marina, for sharing with us all these experiences. And I'm pretty sure all of us are aware of the huge impact created by especially by the Panama Papers project. But how about the journalists? What are the repercussions for the journalists working on this project? I just came back from Ukraine, and I was with our colleagues there who were working on the Panama Papers project, and they are under fire. Our colleagues in Finland and at least 5 other countries are suffering different kind of pressure from legal threats to physical threats, and more common, politicians especially are setting up armies of trolls and people in social media to attack and discredit the journalists. So how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to be part of the solution if there is one?
It's very hard. It's true. The investigation clearly has touched a nerve, and because it has touched political power and it has touched economic power, and that's not okay. And it has created this new dialogue and this debate, and now they want to make this beneficiary owner registries public, and all these things that would go completely against what many of these politicians have been working on for years, which is maintaining that status quo so some people, including themselves, can go and hide money in tax havens. So yes, we have in some cases it has been in the usual places that you would expect this kind of persecution. For example, in Ecuador, where there's very little press freedom at this time, the journalists working on the project were personally attacked by the president through his Twitter account. He offered his personal details. He asked people to put pressure on the journalists to release the data. And of course, it was all, he did all of that. And then a few days later, as it turned out, McClatchy revealed in a story that the president himself was named in the Panama Papers. So he didn't say again that he wanted all the documents public after that. In Hong Kong, we are incredibly excited about how 3 newspapers have been publishing stories, really, really brave. It's tough Hong Kong these days. It's not China, but it's not easy. And Ming Pao, one of the better, very good newspaper, devoted an entire page to the Panama Papers. And it was a record dismissal 2 hours after the paper went to print. The editor was fired at midnight that day because of financial reasons, they said, or cuts, money-saving cuts, 2 hours after devoting the entire page 1 to Panama Papers. In Venezuela, the reporter that I mentioned that protected the investigation from her own bosses was fired promptly. as soon as she revealed to them, finally, like a few weeks before publication, I have this great story for you. And it's not just about the government, it's about all kinds of sectors of society, and it's a story of public interest. And not only they refused to publish the stories, any stories, but they also fired her. So yes, there has been a lot of personal cost, and I think virtually every single member of the team has received a request from their government to give them the documents. In most cases, we don't think the governments are going to act beyond requesting. I think that the request is kind of like to save face and to say, well, we did something, we asked. But in other cases, we're starting to get some concerns. I heard from our reporter in Finland yesterday, and she was concerned that the government was going to move with, was going to raid the newsroom. So we are creating, and we have systems in place to protect the documents if that happens. And the good thing is that the journalists, and that's where we try to make these governments understand, they don't have the documents. They don't own the documents.
Well, we're going to talk about that because I think it's important for our students to understand why that policy, why ICIJ has that policy, especially when you take into account, like Panama has legal assistance agreement with only 13 or 16 countries. That means that all these crimes could be, it's very hard to prosecute all these people because a single document published in a front page is not evidence in the legal field. So all these governments are trying to get access to the data in formal ways. At some point, they're going to go to Panama, and we all know that the police and prosecutors in Panama also got the documents from the headquarters of Mossack Fonseca. But when the time comes to officially request the documents, what's going to happen is that because Panama is not part of the OECD, legally they don't have to deliver it. They don't have to share the documents. So there's a real risk that all these people could get rid of whatever they did.
It's a tough one, and I understand the frustration that some people might feel. On the other hand, how do you, and I always tell myself this, like you can't make exceptions, because then how are you going to do? Okay, we'll give documents to the good governments, but we won't give documents to the bad governments. Can you do that? Can you even at this time, who is a good government? I thought the Iceland government was a good government if we go by those kind of characterizations. Are we then going to give them the documents? So you can't start making exceptions like that, because then you're going to find yourself in a really ugly position having to help really bad people. And governments should have their own ways and instruments and vehicles for investigation. One interesting and ironic thing that we have experienced in the previous offshore investigations is that when they come and ask us the document, it happened with offshore leaks. We had 3 different US agencies. The first US agency that came sat across the table and said, we're the good guys, but the ones that are waiting outside are not the good guys. So you can imagine who they were. And it turned out that the US government realized after they were coming and asking and threatening that they had this data all along, because whistleblowers give them this data. And they just don't have the time, the resources, or who knows what, to investigate and to act on these leaks that they get. So it was 20 days after we published, UK, Australia, and the US came out with a press release saying, as it turns out, we have this data, and we are going to do what the journalists did, and we're going to collaborate with other governments, and we're going to start investigations. So imagine if we had kind of gone out of our way to try to help them, or no, that's not our job. Our job is to do the investigations, to publish, to be as comprehensive and, of course, as accurate as possible, and to publish some documents when appropriate, even if they can be used in court. It's not my problem. But at least they are there, and they can trigger something. And I'm happy to hear, we have so many more experienced professors and journalists here, that if any of you have a thought on this or a different take on this issue of helping governments in cases like this?
Yeah, we're going to open up for questions, but before that, there are many media organizations and shareholders of major media organizations around the world listed in the Panama Papers. And probably the best example is Argentina, your own country. The partners you had there, or you have in there, the main shareholders were listed in the Panama Papers. And I mean, you can tell the story, but how many cases do you have like that? And how a journalist, like thinking about, I mean, our students are going to go out there. What do you do when you face this problem?
There is a surprising high number of media organizations that are involved in the Panama Papers. It looks like newspapers and television stations around the world use the offshore world a lot for investments and other business. And in many cases were the owners, as you say, of media organizations that we were partnering with. So we urge our journalists to publish very promptly. In our view, you find the owner of your paper, that's a day one story. That's a story that needs to go very fast and very soon, and it should have the same journalistic treatment as all the other stories you are publishing. In some cases, it happened that the owners of some media organizations didn't allow the journalists to report journalistically about their own offshore assets. And instead, they chose to write editorials like a note to our readers explaining, well, yes, we are also in the Panama Papers, but you really shouldn't worry about it. I find that I find that troubling. And again, how far can ICIJ, as ICIJ can we force? We try to not meddle editorially. We can't. We really don't have any legal standing, nor do we want to do it, but we strongly suggest. And there have been many, many stories of, if you search, of media organizations that are reporting about their own presence in the papers, but there are many more, and there are some that haven't been found. So somebody should do a comprehensive story about media ownership or about media organizations in the Panama Papers.
Perhaps we can do that from here.
Maybe.
This is a kind of a silly question, but I mean, you have 11.5 million documents that are never going to see light. You're about to publish the list of companies, shareholders, and people involved in these networks, but the documents, all these emails you just showed us, are going to be secret, are going to keep being secret. Is there any way that, I don't know, maybe ICIJ or any other organization can redact these documents so they can be public?
It's not so much redacting only. Yes, one of the reasons why you don't dump, well, you don't dump in the internet 11 million records because we are journalists, and we feel like we have been entrusted with this information to treat it through a journalistic lens, not to, otherwise the whistleblower could have given it to organizations that would do just that. They would dump it on the internet. We know it too well. They instead came to ICIJ and they said, you journalists, do your work. And that's why this investigation didn't involve 10 people, 50 people, 100 people. It involved 400 people, 109 media organizations in 80 countries. That was one of when we realized how big this was and how much public interest there was in this data, we realized that part of our mission was to make it was to be as inclusive as possible and include all kinds of media organizations also, not, so we try to diversify non-profit centers, television stations, left-leaning, right-leaning. We have, of all taste and kind, so we can kind of be assured that different points of view are going to be interrogating this data. So that's the best we could do, and we're going to continue adding. I think it's hard to say, like, you haven't done justice. I'm sure there are stories that haven't been explored. I'm sure this data is going to continue making headlines maybe for years to come because, again, it resolves mysteries. So when a new mystery comes to light, when a new corruption comes to light, and those journalists go to the Panama Papers and they find a connection there, then they're going to write about it, and the data is going to continue solving mysteries for years to come. And it will continue being open to all the journalists who worked on the papers and also to new journalists. We are adding now journalists in New Zealand that we hadn't worked with. We're going to add people in Morocco. We're going to add people, where else that we just added? I forgot what other country. Yeah, sorry, Sri Lanka, exactly. So we are going now out of our way to find countries where we haven't reported. We're looking for a good reporter in Bolivia. If anybody knows one, we would love to do the Bolivia story. So that's what we're going to continue to do. But also remember, we're a small team. At some point, we're going to need to move on to the next story.
For those of you who are following online, Marina is here visiting our class that is called Using Data to Investigate Across Borders. It's totally related to what you guys do in ICIJ. So what do you say to one of our students from class if they want to pursue this kind of collaboration? What to avoid? What kind of set of mind do you need to have to start collaborating?
I think you have the perfect opportunity to start collaborating here in the school because you are often asked to work in teams. And so I would say the collaboration state of mind is one that everything you do in the reporting process is not just for yourself. You're thinking about how you're going to contribute to a team. So if you're doing an interview, you're not writing like unintelligible notes in a little notebook. You are typing, or if you do that, then you're typing your interview and you're sharing it with your colleagues. You are willing to do things that are not going to necessarily help you in the one story that you are writing in the team, but that may help the story of a team member. And that's hard. We saw that all the time in Panama Papers, where journalists were going out of their way to help somebody in a story that had no relevance to their country, but they needed that document from Nigeria or whatever. And so the poor Nigeria reporter was taking a bus and trying to get that document for that journalist in Norway, right? And so it's having that mentality of community, working in ways that are going to be shareable, that can easily be shareable, and also connecting yourself with groups like ICIJ and many others. There are networks in Latin America, there are networks in Eastern Europe. So if you're doing a story that connects with those parts of the world, contact those local reporters, contact those networks of people, and they are going to be, because they already have this mentality, you're going to be surprised how ready they're going to be to help you for free get what you need in those countries. And then when it's your turn to return that favor, do it. It's a two-way thing. So if you don't give, you're not going to get, and you're not going to be invited to the collaborations. So I think that's...
Yeah, we have been experiencing this in class, and so every ICIJ member that we contact for the investigation, they have been immensely helpful. So thank you very much, Marina. We're going to open up for questions. Please go to the mic and identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Victor. I'm a part-time student here, and so I was sort of wondering, you said that there was a collaborative sort of negotiation to set the date for the release of the documents, and did you sort of, was there sort of a push and pull between different people at sort of, because someone like McCree was, found in the documents while, and you were investigating while the campaign was going on, so was there sort of a disappointment that you couldn't get that segment of the story out earlier, or why did you see it as a necessity to sort of release it all at once rather than, the Iceland story will go out this date, the Argentina story will happen this time?
Thank you. That's a good question. There are security reasons where you don't want to start. There are always going to be world events, and news are going to break, and you're going to have a good excuse to publish. When you're working with 400 people, again, it's about exceptions. And let me tell you some of the exceptions we could have made. There was a FIFA scandal. We had a ton of information on FIFA. There was the Lava Jato scandal in Brazil, biggest corruption case in Latin America's history, probably. We had 100 offshore companies linked to Lava Jato. there was the Macri election, there were other elections around the world. If we started making exceptions, it was going to be never ending. It was going to endanger, because, okay, fine, we make an exception for Macri. What do you say? Where did you get the documents? Where did this come from? Then you have to start revealing things, and you have to start, open yourself up for questions, distracting the journalists from the work they are doing, and also losing the opportunity to have that big global impact, because part of why was this such a commotion? Do you think if we had kind of diluted things and start going, drip by drip over time, do you think we would have had this big, massive effect? I don't think so. I think there was a big part of it was that everybody was ready to go in the same minute with, like all over the world in 80 countries, big headlines of important people of public interest that allow us to say, oh, it's not just that, it's not just that, it's not this, it's not just the Chinese, it's not just the businessmen in Argentina, it's everyone. It's the system. So that was the best way to also tell the systemic story, and not just the people, this person is in the data, the other person is in the data. But yeah, it was hard, and reporters did push and did ask, can we publish now? Can we publish just the FIFA stuff? And we said no in every case.
Okay, thank you.
I think it was a good decision. Thanks.
Speaking about that, in the past, as an old ICIJ member, I remember we used to, ICIJ used to not control, but kind of have applying the same standards for every publication. And you didn't edit everything, but it was highly controlled. And this changed after offshore leaks. Why?
Because in the past we did smaller investigations in which we kind of hired ICIJ members to work for us. So we would have like a team of 10 members from different countries, and we would basically hire them as freelancers. And then they would be writing the stories, and we would edit them very closely and all that. And the big change that came with offshore leaks and with my boss, Gerard Ryle, was that he said, we don't need to do that. We'll have our team, and yes, we'll have some freelancers and staffers, but then we will involve all the media organizations, as many as we can, from the very beginning, and they will be responsible for their own work. And they will have to invest also in the investigation, which is a great, from a business model type thing. So when we meet, ICIJ is not paying for anybody to go to that meeting. The media organizations are paying for them. And the same way they are taking their own legal responsibility. If they make a mistake, is the Irish Times or whatever other paper, whoever made them, it's their responsibility, and they are going to be held accountable in their own countries, because it would be crazy to think that we can centralize that kind of...
I was just thinking about the freelancers, or Johannes, for instance, in Iceland. How did they finance all this traveling and all the time they were?
The reality is that we don't work with that many freelancers, but we do work with some freelancers. And in that case, for example, Johannes was able, he basically was able with his own savings to. He knew this was his probably lifetime story. So it was a good bet for him. So it was just 9 months where he didn't have income, but believe me, I think he's going to have a job for a long time, because he's the best-known journalist in his country now. And other freelancers, for example, Li Assist in Italy, they make agreements with magazines, so yeah.
Hi, hello. I'm Ilgin Yorulmaz. I'm a journalism student here from Turkey. I'm very intrigued by the whole story, and especially the whistleblower, John Doe. How did the Süddeutsche Zeitung journalists verify his authenticity, and what was done to protect, or him or her, we don't know, his privacy?
Yeah. So they follow all the instructions that he or she gave about how he wanted to be protected, how the communications were going to happen. As you saw, no meetings are ever going to happen, and this is how we're going to do everything. And they follow very carefully every single instruction. So you said how they, one question was how they protect him, and what was
and
that?
the authenticity.
Oh, how they verify the authenticity. Well, we were able to go outside, as I said, outside of the data and verify the information. So we would look at a case, and we would go then to court records, we would go to the, basically the company registries, and just the basic thing is like, did this company exist? And in every single case, we were able to verify that it existed, that the dates matched, that the nominee directors that the registry mentioned were saying that we had in the data. So it was always a process of going outside of the data and verifying. And with every story we wrote was the same. It's also very hard to make up 11 million records. It was all very rare.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
My name is Devansh and I'm from India. I'm also studying over here. And so I wanted to know, like you said, carrying forward this also serves as a database for future investigations. But I was actually wondering how that works. Would it only be the journalists who are affiliated with ICIJ that can access the database and plug in different companies who they come across? Or would there be a mechanism for all investigative journalists like across the world to kind of search for a company's name, and then if we know there's more information, we can do something more? Because I mean, like I've personally used WikiLeaks a lot. I mean, like any investigation I do, it's one of the first databases that I go to in WikiLeaks and Offshore Leaks, the database. So I was wondering how that would be carried forward, and yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why we're making this database public, because we know it's going to spark a lot new investigations and findings. We are excited to see what stories we missed. We do get a little nervous, like did we miss something huge that somebody's going to find, but I think it's good for the story. Once you find, let's say that we release this data, you start going through the India data, you'll be able to filter by country and see all the addresses and all that. If you find something that is really important and of public interest, and you make a case that you want to do this story, and this is what you're going to do, and this is why it matters, we will definitely, to anybody who is a journalist, and that we can verify that it's a reputable journalist and working for a reputable media organization, or even if it is a freelancer as well, we will consider, we will try to give access as much as we can humanly possibly handle. Because again, we don't have an arm. Every time we add somebody to the project, it requires not a lengthy, but a process of training and hooking you up with all the databases. It's not easy. It's like a full-time job for somebody. So, and we already have like 400 people to take care of. So we will continue adding, but as much as we can. So yes, if you find something, please get in touch.
Okay, yeah. But just to follow up on that, I mean, only 100,000 or 200,000 documents from the 11 million are actually being made public, right?
Yes.
But are all the different companies being made public, or are some companies continuing
so we're not making documents public. What we are making public is what is called a structured database. And those are the rows and columns that say company, shareholders, directors, beneficial owners, address. So that information, so you will be able to search your own name, and if you are in there, you'll see a dot with your name, and then you will be able to expand and see all the companies that you had. And the addresses and what role you played in those companies. You were a shareholder, you were a director, when the company was incorporated, where was it incorporated, and what address the person gave at the time of incorporation. So it's basic information that in our view should be public and transparent, and that is going to help a lot start investigations, and then of course, then if we can back it up with the documents we have, we will try to help journalists as much as possible do that. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Chihei. I'm a student at the J School. And, well, you said that there were 3 terabytes of data leaked from this John Doe guy. And I can't help but think, what if it didn't go to the right hands? What if it weren't records, like criminal records, that John Doe wanted to shed light on or bring justice? What do you think, with so much data being available online, what do you think this could be like an implication? Do you think it would lead to like transparency in corporations or governments, or could it be possibly a security threat, like a cyber security threat?
A cybersecurity threat for
just like data. What if it wasn't criminal records? What if it was personal information?
There's a lot of personal information in the documents, and that's one of the reasons why we don't make it public. I always say there's a lot of like very personal information, bank accounts, and very personal information, emails, but it's also a lot of like really uninteresting information that nobody wants to read, and that is not important. But I don't know if I understand completely the question.
I mean, you were wondering what would have happened if the source, instead of giving the data to ICIJ or to the German newspaper,
Well, not
would make it
necessarily
public?
the Panama Papers, but more
general.
so just the whole trend of so much data being available.
Okay. Well, and I think that's one of the reasons. Yeah, it is a little scary, but I also think the great news is that these whistleblowers are trusting journalists again. They are trusting journalists that journalists can protect the data. Touch wood. No, nobody's completely 100%, but we're trying really hard. Protect the data. Look at the data journalistically. Be rigorous. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think as long as we continue that trend, they will continue coming. And important stories of public interest will be revealed.
Well, and actually that can lead us to talk about security and cybersecurity. I don't know how much of this you can share, but after publication, there have been some threats or security threats, especially with the data. What kind of measures you have?
Well, we have full-time people basically looking at the servers and anticipating, like just seeing the activity. And after we published, yes, we had some bad activity, attacks, and we had to move things around, and we did. And we increased our security measures. For example, before we published, we didn't require journalists to have PGP encryption, because we thought when we were working privately and in secret, we were happy taking, we were also not using email too much, but since most of the communication was done through iHub that I showed, we thought that was okay, that was secure. And then we also were using Hashmail, for example, which it turns out is not that safe. It's a little bit safer, but it's not that safe at all. So after publication, we said, blanket rule, everybody gets a PGP. And we first said, please get a PGP. And about a third of the reporters quickly, within a week, got their PGP keys. And now we said, I think we gave them time until May 2nd to get their PGPs, or they're not going to have any longer access to the data. So if you don't have a PGP, we're not going to share the URLs with you, we're not going to share passwords with you, and you'll get, you just won't be able to access it anymore. And it's a high bar, but I think it's a good one, and I think it's great that so many journalists around the world are now creating this, more secure way of communication.
I wondered if Panama Paper is a miracle or a singular event, or there's some systematic trend for collaborative journalism in a global scale. And also, considering the founder of Mounsett Fonseca said the whole event, nothing is found illegal, the only illegal thing is the hack. So I wonder if the data was not leaked, and are the investigative journalism all depending on the leak of the data, which is, you can never expect that. So that's just.
Well, it's not a miracle. We have seen way too many leaks in the past few years, and we always thought this is the one and only, and let's enjoy it because it's never going to happen again, and it happened again. So I think we are seeing a trend, and there are, more of this data is available, and more of this data is going to be revealed, and it's going to be national security, and it's going to be secret companies, and maybe it's going to be something else later, bribery. So I think it's definitely a trend, and whistleblowers are not necessarily going to household names all the time. They are going to nonprofit organizations. They are going to a newspaper that many of you maybe didn't know it existed or can't pronounce their name. They are very careful. They look, they analyze the journalist, and that are the journalists not only reliable journalistically but also technologically. So in that sense, I think there is a trend. With respect to Mossack Fonseca saying, I think we have proven extensively that there was a lot of criminality and illegality involved. And those were the best and biggest stories that we published. Yes, there are many things that are legal, and not everybody who opens an offshore company is a criminal, but it's a system that allows criminality and enables criminality because of the secrecy, because you supposedly are never going to be connected to that company that you created for some purpose. Until now, where it turns out that that information is public, and that secrecy has become sort of a myth. The offshore world.
Yeah, in a way, I wonder, is that the great journalism will always depend on
No,
some
and it won't depend on the leaks.
illegal-
No, definitely not. Definitely not. We have, so many, leaks are like 1 or 2 a year, every 3 years or whatever, and there are like hundreds and thousands of investigations that are not leaks, that are, piecing the data together using public records and a million other techniques that are the ones you learn here. So I think that leaks are a trend, but definitely not the only way of going about investigative journalism. So.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Selena. I'm a Stabile student from Hong Kong. I just wonder if you have any worries that this being some sort of gigantic spin, given that it's an external attack on the servers.
That this was a gigantic spin by...
Like a spin
that somebody
by the
is
source.
operating us?
No, not operating you, but like by leaking or by providing you with the documents that are trying to attack some parties that were involved.
Sources have motivations, and their motivations are not always idealistic and completely pure. That's the reality. They are human beings, they are complex, and they have different motivations. What matters to us, we don't think there's a big conspiracy behind the source's motivation, but it might be that, there might be some people in the data that the source doesn't particularly like. I don't know. We don't have any knowledge of that. And the important thing is that we don't let any source tell us what to report, for example. Or direct us in any way.
You mentioned that he had his own conditions, he or she or them, or they.
He she or they.
What were those conditions?
The conditions were mostly about how the communication was going to happen. And again, this is Süddeutsche Zeitungs, the German reporter's source. It wasn't my source. I have never been in touch with the source. But I understand for what we saw here and what they have published that there were conditions about how the communication was going to happen.
But not about the content?
No, not at all. Not at all, no.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions.
Sorry. Did the source ever contact you for feedback after it was public? Like after the publication?
No. We understand the source is quite happy, but that's about it.
How do you know?
We understand that,
Oh. Okay.
That source, but yeah.
Hi, my name's Nina. I'm a Stabile student here. I was interested in how you talked about selecting the right team members. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about how you chose the journalists and the participating organizations, if it was based on geography or companies or people that were implicated, or if it was based on organization.
We have this 4-step criteria, if I can remember it. We pick journalists with a proven record of investigative reporting. So first we look at that. We pick journalists who have the right environment on their own media organizations to do this kind of slow journalism. So it doesn't help if somebody has been a great investigative journalist in his country and is now working for something that, for an organization that forces that person to write 3 things a day, because then that person is never going to have time to investigate. So we need media organizations that are going to support the journalist and are going to give he or she the time, if not full-time, part-time, to do the work. We look for journalists who have also a proven record of being a team member. So that's what I said before. And that is based on our own experience working with that journalist in the past, And also we background people and we talk to other people and we ask, is this person an easygoing person? Frankly, like, is this person willing to share? Or we interrogate them a little bit too, like, if you find X, will you immediately share it with the rest? Do you have any hesitations about sharing with any of these other partners? And that, and then the fourth one I said is generally nice people. Life is short, so.
Hi, Marina. My name is John Paul. I'm with the Data Specialization Program here at Columbia. My question to you is, I know that you came from a pretty deep and experienced background yourself from in journalism. So when something like this came along, what are the most important things that you think that you learned, both from either working in teams or just the way data journalism is done in general?
So what are some of the lessons learned about working with big? Well, one of the lessons learned is like if this is a trend, big data and these leaks and all that, we better either have the skills ourselves, the data skills ourselves, or we better are very good friends with people who have those skills and are going to help us. When we did the first investigation offshore leaks at ICIJ, Giannina knows, we didn't have these skills and we didn't have these people, and we had to rely on whoever we could rely, including, thank God, Giannina Segnini and her team at La Nación, who came to the rescue. Without them, we couldn't have done the work. We also didn't have a big budget at the time. We don't have a big budget now either, but we know a lot of people now, and we have, so one of the big lessons is it's not an option anymore. We need to have the data skills, at least the basic ones, all of us, the basic security skills as well, and then we need to incorporate programmers and engineers and data analysts to our teams, and they are an essential part of the team. So I'll say that for now.
All right. So thank you very much, Marina, for joining us
and
sharing all. And thank you all for coming.
And I'll be around, I think, for a little bit more if anybody has a question.
Yeah, for around 15 minutes, and then we're going to class.
Thank you for your time.